Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. The video that I just did for Higher Hertz was about bit and sample rate, so this actually ends up being a nice fit for that. We're looking at TAL's DAC. DAC standing for Digital to Analog Converter. And everything has a DAC. It used to be that not many things had DACs, but now everything has a DAC. A true analog synth doesn't have a DAC because there's no D happening, because it's all A. But as soon as you get any kind of combined thing, then chances are some or all of it's happening in the digital domain. Digital analog synths or digitally controlled analog synths were still analog, but as soon as we got to something where lots of processing was done, or it was analog that was fed into an effects unit, then there was a DAC to convert what was being done in the digital domain back into the sound domain that we can hear. So your computer has a DAC. You may well have spent some money buying a fancier DAC. The chances are you call that your audio interface. There has been a fashion amongst gamers or other people to be buying DACs. But it's kind of silly because, as I've pointed out, what comes on most computers now, if you get a Windows machine, chances are you've got a Realtek attached to the motherboard, and that sounds just darn fine. The only real reason that you'd want to not use it for making music is just latency. You will hear times where I'm doing things, there's a bit of a gap between what's being played and me, and that's just because we've got quite a bit of latency on the Realtek system because of the DirectX drivers. You get the audio interface to get access to the ASIO drivers, which are much faster, before you say to me, we'll just use ASIO for all. Yeah, that's a fudge. And if it amuses you, but it's a fudge and it's not actually helping you in any particularly good way at all. So TAL's DAC. TAL's DAC is a kind of emulator for digital analog converters. It comes from his sampler instrument. This is the latest version of it, so I did a big review of it. I'll try and remember to put the pic up here, so it looks a little bit more streamlined now, which is nice. It is nice that TAL keeps revising his product and improving it and streamlining it. That's a nice thing. It's a plus about him. But you'll see this bit in here called the resampler. That has been extracted and put in its own box so that you can apply anything to it. Now, DAC in this sense really applies to the digital analog converter that came on the back end of samplers in particular. Yes, a Casio CZ or a DX7 had a DAC on the end of it, otherwise we would have heard nothing. But mostly there's that thought there with regards to samplers. So the Akai 9s and 1000s and the EMU emulators and Emaxes, the DACs on those, the DACs on the EMU stuff was just superb, and lots of other people licensed that, particularly Creative. So Sandblasters came to all run EMU DACs, and for their time and place, they were about the best you could buy, at least affordably. Unfortunately, I don't know who runs their DACs now. Maybe they simply became outmoded. But the whole idea of TAL DAC is to allow us to emulate those things. To give you a sense of what you might use it for, then here is something I prepared earlier. I made this very simple 3-track piece, and it's all the instruments that you see and hear, but it's clean, as in what you hear there has no DAC stuff happening. So it's just the straight digital thing. Now, it sounds nice, it sounds very clean, but every instrument is awfully present. And if we were going down the path of saying, here's our mix and I've mastered it and everything, then we may want to be looking a little bit more at least EQ on the subtractor part, the doody arpeggio, because it's not really working very nicely. So we bring in a version where TAL DAC, as you can see, is applied to everything. Clean, DAC'd. Clean, DACT. Now there is a little situation as we AB there that there's an LFO that's running freeform there, so it can be in a slightly different spot as we move from one to another. But the reality is we do end up with a slightly different feel to the mix. Everything's actually softer. Initially, you'll probably think, oh, well, that one's better, it's louder, it's more forward, But this one actually has a nicer presence to it. I've only got the DACs on the instruments. I'm not messing around with the DAC on the masters. I didn't even try it there. That's not to say that you can't, but it may be a little bit more complex. Here, I've just given each instrument a DAC, as though they were digital instruments, and use that to help give them a sense of a place in time and therefore in mix. Now it's subtle, but the thing is that sound has rolled off some of its highs, and we've also added some noise, plain noise. There's a recent video on noise, which means that this sound softens rather than being very overly defined. It has softened up. So while we can look at TAL DAC as being just a DAC, the whole idea is it's a kind of saturator. It's also a kind of bit crusher, and so it is a bit crusher, but there is more going on here than in your average bit crusher. It's a bit more intelligent, but it does make it more complex. So its strength is also its weakness, which is kind of to be expected here. Now, of course, we all know who TAL are, and they are one of the nicest sort of independent on their own developers. They haven't gotten into bed with anybody else. They're not purchased through someone else's store where you spend X amount of money a month. You just buy the things like you buy your car or you buy your food. You buy them, you use them. Most, if not all, updates actually seem to be included, which is very, very kind. I'm not giving that as a definite for all times, but I've been able to update things without having to pay anything. It's just like, oh, here's a better version. Winning, that's nice. TAL has a reasonable range, but it's a limited range. He knows what he wants to focus on, and he has focused on that, and good on him. You can purchase the DAC just on its own. If you haven't got or don't want the sampler, then you can buy it for $25 US, I assume, plus any relevant taxes. If you already have his sampler instrument and you just want to try the DAC on its own externally, then you can download it and apply the license from your sampler and it will work for it. That's how I end up having it. As I say, it brings back the character of the sound of 80s samplers and lo-fi devices in one effect plugin. You can use it for subtle sound changes and extreme effects. Yes, you definitely can. Initially, you may find it harder to achieve subtle. I was put off it for quite some time because I couldn't get subtle, and this latest version has solved one of those problems that made it very hard to be subtle. Character and grit to your drum, synth, or sampled sounds. There's a saturation stage, yes. Okay. But if we focus mostly just on the bit and sample rate thing, then understanding the blocks and what have you, which will pop up at some stage a little bit later, helps us to understand, okay, here's how we can change how our sound is moving from the instrument into the part of the mix, and then, therefore, the real world. In terms of what's good and what's bad, well, it's definitely a better than average bit crusher. TAL makes a point of trying to say it's not a bit crusher at all, but technically it probably is. But he's focusing far more on delivering a DAC experience than he is on just providing a typical turn down the rate and the bit and maybe distort it and it'll get ugly. He's trying to emulate what actually happened inside those older DACs. So there's more to it than that. So it is a better than average bit crusher. You can use it subtly to help a mix. As I said, you do need to spend some time. The first little while that you use it, you're probably going to sail straight past subtle and get into smashing and uglifying. That's a thing you can use it for if that's what you're looking for. I'm always far more interested in subtle. I don't want people to be going, oh, look, Benedict's bit crushing. There are times I do it, but I just don't. It's not my approach to life. But if you're looking for beauty, then you do need to learn to be a little bit more subtle, and it will deliver that. And as I've said, his updates often seem to be included. In this case, the thing that makes me happy is that with amounts, you can actually type them in. The last version that I had, you couldn't type amounts in, which meant that you could never hit specific amounts. And that was, well, infuriating, because you will find that in practical terms, the way the knobs around things, the subtle breakup of the digital analog conversion behaves quite differently at 22050 and 22150. So things that work nicely at 22050 will just be horrific at 22150. So if you can't hit exact numbers in certain situations, particularly the given famous numbers, then you will probably just get nasty results. The fact that you can now type things in some or all spots is a big improvement. We should be fair about the bad or limits. It's not the easiest plugin. It is a little obscure. Okay, there is good reason for it to be this way because it's not your average bit crusher. It is an actual emulator of a DAC. And that means that we need to think a little bit more carefully about where we put it, and we can put it absolutely anywhere we want. But if we're wanting the feel of those instruments and that time, then where we put it is going to influence the results. Most of the time, we're going to want to put it directly with the instrument, not after other plugins. So if we put the DAC after our, in this case, Dirty LA compressor, then we're giving the impression that this compressor is actually on board. Now, as I've said, there are instruments that are like that. The Andromeda, the LSS Andromeda, had digital effects. It was a completely analog device until you put it through the digital effects. And plenty of people felt that the instrument lost its coolth the moment you dialed up a digital delay or anything like that, because what had happened was that you went from being purely analog to actually having a DAC on the end. So just be very cautious about where you put it. That's not discussed. The manual is the problem here. Not so much the device, especially now it's got improved usability, but the manual is just pretty obvious. You know, your sample rate knob changes your sample rate. Thank you so much, Captain Obvious. There is no deeper explanation as to what this is really about or why we might want a bit scale knob or what bit rate is. There's no real discussion of that, which I think makes it a lot harder for most people, myself included, and I've been doing this, having owned Emaxes and what have you back in the late 80s, early 90s. I've been doing this for 30, 40 years, and it is harder to use because there isn't a deeper explanation of it. Now, while I get that he'll go, well, but nobody's going to read it. Yeah, but the few people who truly care, the freaks who are going to really be behind you on this, like me, are going to be put off. So my advice, again, is manufacturers, please make really good manuals. Just the Captain Obvious stuff. People don't need the manual, that's why they don't read it. Add some deeper value. The old Emax manual by Craig Anderton, the Casio CZ1000 manual, I'm not sure who it was by, they added real value. I think that's where you can differentiate yourself as a developer, not only in your product, because this is a different kind of a product, but also in helping people really get and grok and dig deeper value out of your product rather than blindly wandering around going, what's that? Oh, okay, I don't get this. We don't want that. That's no good for anyone. But overall, once you can understand what the product is and how it works and take your time to work out how to get it to do what you want it to do, then it is a good product. In terms of features, okay, we're in the live mode now, so here, same thing. We will just pop it onto drums, because for most people that would be the easiest way of hearing it. So we've got a DAC here. Quite a lot of features, a lot more than you're used to on the average bit crusher. Working across the top, there are some presets. There are some ones for doing nasty stuff, which, as I've said, I'm not particularly interested in, but they are there. It's the gentle ones that are interesting. So 8-bit, 22K, and then emulations of particular devices. There doesn't seem to be a bypass on board, which is a bit... Might just pop that compressor out. And I think we probably should pop this reverb out, because it makes it a little harder to hear things. So whilst we're at it, we'll pop the tape machine out as well, so it's no longer fully mastered. Flat, pure digital sound. Now, with added DAC emulation. To say it's analog sound is just stupid. It's of course analog sound because you're listening to it, but you hear that we've got more movement and character in this. I've only... This is an EMU, so it'll be an emulator 2. I don't know what sample rates on emulator 2s were, but I know that sample rate on my Emax 2 was more like 28 something or other. Maybe they just rounded that up, but I don't recall it sounding as noisy as this. But maybe I just had made my peace with it. But in terms of being able to say, oh, that just sounds like my Emax, no. The S1000s, well, in some ways they were technically good, but they weren't as pleasing to listen to musically as the EMU stuff. I guess you can hear that there, that it does seem clean. This does sound warm. I'm not going to say how accurate those presets are because, as I say, I'm not convinced, but nor do I rightly care, per se. If we just go to the default, then it's set to a nothing happening 1644. So that's everything as it should be, boys and girls kind of approach. Nice place to start. Now, this works under the logic of that, firstly, we're recording our sample, so that's into the top half, and then the real DAC is happening on the other side here, which is then when it gets spat back out again. Yes, if I had my Emax sitting in front of me right here, it wouldn't do anything until I had sampled some sounds into it. But to be fair, that there is a difference here in that I will sample my sound into my Emax, I will synthesize it, use all the parameters, and then it will go out the DAC after things have happened. So if we wanted to be a lot more accurate, it would be an awful lot more difficult. And I did talk about this, I'm pretty sure, when I went through his sampler instrument, just that the instrument here, this is put as an effect on the end, when really in reality it should sit either just between the samples themselves and then have the second half on the output. Therefore the filtering and what have you is happening between the here's where we've sampled it and here's where we're spitting it out, or almost like in front of the samples. But I think it should, what they call the recording section should happen here, and the true DAC, the output, should happen after. And wisely in the case here, before the EQ and chorus and what have you, because they would have been outboard. Onboard effects didn't come till a little bit later, and you can do it that way, as I said, if you want, but then we're talking more M1 than Emax. So this is a sort of an all-in-one which does munge the reality of it. But this is the way it goes. So we've got the volume input. So this is our drive. How hard we're hitting our ADC, analog to digital converter, really, sort of. And then we set our sample rates. It was the highest rate on the Emacs was 2, was about 39, and this is where you would want to know your exact numbers and type them in. That's your sample rate. So obviously we can get a little bit as your father. It defaults to 48. I'm not sure quite why that is. I would rather it defaulted to 44, but it probably makes no real difference. And then we've got bitrate, which is more about your level. It's not until you go fairly low you'll start to notice issues, but you will notice that with low rates, quieter sounds will just disappear, which is part of why you have this input drive and a lot of early sample stuff, you know, Public Enemy, that sort of stuff, was quite splatty because the sample rates were low, and so they were pushing into the units pretty hard. So it wasn't the DAC, it was the ADC, where there was a lot of noise added in, a lot of splattiness and what have you. So if we put this down at... then we get that really cool lo-fi, grainy sort of sound. And you can hear that it's actually changing some of the rhythm because it's changing how some of the sounds behave. So drive input, if you are after more of that gritty Public Enemy sort of thing, the early rap type thing, MPC vibe, then push on your front end and then, you know, meddle around with your sample rates. And your bit rate will give you that crunchier sort of sound. With your sample rates and your bit rates, you will find that they behave better, as I said before, they're more well behaved when you hit particular targets. So 22050 is a target. Things are designed to work at that rate. 44100, things are designed to work at that rate. So you will find that things behave pretty well. But you can hear there's some damage happening here at 43458 because it's an odd rate. It's just that the systems aren't really designed to handle these. They are not what we might call sensible or practical rates. Now you can use them, and that is when this becomes just a bit crusher, as in you're sort of saying, okay, well, I'll make it sound a bit... Okay, fair enough, go for it. You've got this quality knob, which, to be perfectly blunt, I never really felt like I understood. I think that depends how things are behaving, and obviously your sample rate settings. And to be able to say to you with any sort of feeling that I know what it does, I don't know. Sorry, that's where your manual has let you down, Mr. Tal. Bit scale is kind of an interesting one. It comes and goes with... Actually, no, it stays in this one. Things are a little different from the one before. I spent most of my time in the version before. But bit scale is taking the bit rate that you've got and then dividing it by. So that's like 1/10 of 8-bit, which is naturally pretty darn nasty. So if you're looking to achieve a particular set of numbers, then you're going to leave that on 100%. As you hear that while that's degraded, it's degraded in a way that has a charm rather than being nasty. Whereas we do this, it just starts to go past charming to nasty. If you're trying to sound like Nine Inch Nails, then by all means just use odd numbers and nasty, and now you can pretend to be Trent Reznor. Depends what you're looking for. As I say, that has never been my cup of meat. I do like that this seems to take only exact numbers. A lot of other bit crushers I haven't liked because they give you strange, like in-between sorts of numbers. It would be nice if this had a little button so that it just jumped to known numbers, especially seeing it is about emulating particular instruments. So it'd be nice if it had the numbers, especially if there was a little row of buttons down that, like I could press Emacs and then it would jump to the numbers that were available in an Emacs. That would be kind of cool. How much work that would be, I don't know. But I guess if you get into that point, then it's possible that you know, or at least know to be able to Google the manual for an Emacs and, and go find the section on available sampling rates. So that's all those knobs. They are then affected by Moolaw. Moolaw is an emulation of a particular DAC. I think it is the AM6070. I think that was the one. It says in the manual what it is. Don't know, don't care. And then dithering, so that you've got the ability to dither, and that's what this bias then becomes. You'll see that with Moolaw, the bitrate disappears and it becomes about dither. Dither is simply a way of trying to smooth off quality, as is oversampling. So those two match each other. I will stay out of them. Moolaw is just a way of trying to increase the quality, particularly at lower bit rates. So you hear it warms a bit. Dithering does allow you to use this as a warmer, so as a warming saturator. So if you're using this not so much to emulate an exact device, but just to say, okay, I'm going to use the vagaries and the charms of DACs to create character in my piece and warm at the same time, then you probably want Moolaw and dithering on, because you do end up with a warmer sound. So that's, in theory, is us sampling the sound into our device. We've then got the other side, which he calls reconstruction, but that is really the DAC, the digital to audio bit, analog to digital and digital to analog, and that's on the other side. There are modes. They are different kinds of quality. Hold is pretty nasty quality. Variable is more modern and is going to be a lot more accommodating. Linear is quite linear, and the Sync 8 is what was used by Akai. Like a lot of people, he's a little Akai obsessed, but like most EMU people, I'm somewhat EMU obsessed. I was never a fan of the Akai thing. It always seemed rather obtuse and technical to me. But then the Akai people thought that the EMUs had no cool features because they were quite low on features, but they were high on beauty as a musical instrument. Different strokes for different folks. This will be a lot more obvious in musical material than in drummy material. So you can choose different ways. If you're thinking, oh, this is just a bit too ugly, then flip to variable. You've then got some filters, which sometimes you will hear, sometimes you will not. They are simply fixed filters to try to make the results of slightly messed up samples, let's put that back onto a logical rate, sound a little less messed up. Hear how that sounds better already, just going to 22050. So definitely with filter 1, there is a very, very subtle improvement in some of the noisiness in the high end. They will work or not work for you. They are not designed to be mini-mode filters. They are just a preset digital filter inside the guts to try to help improve poor sample rate conversion stuff. You then got jitter. Jitter is an interesting one. Jitter quite literally means the head moves about. So in a perfect situation, the head is always exactly where it should be. Jitter means that it jumps around, a little like a needle on a record. When people are jumping up and down, the needle just bounces around, and soon your song becomes completely unplayable. And it no longer sounds like the Nutbush. One of the charms with this is that if you're using this as a saturator, let's say we're keeping our rates all high, this is in effect adding noise into our signal, because our head is doing this. Rather than being exactly where it should be, it's somewhere around where it should be. And you can hear it actually introduces noise. And the timbre of the noise actually changes based on how jittery we are. Obviously, that's really nasty. So if you watch the video on noise, which was a week ago or something like that, a couple of weeks, then you see me adding noise inside synth sounds and what have you to achieve a very similar sort of result. But jitter noise sounds different from adding white noise. So it's a different way of doing things. Now, when I set this up, we listen back to our thing here, there is a little bit of jitter noise in all of these. And while it makes it noisy, it also creates a kind of a softness, a more analogness, a real worldness to it, because it means that these perfect digital synths and sampler are no longer so perfect. Their perfectness, their pin sharpness, their incredible accuracy from digital doing exactly what it does best means that we don't love them as much as we would like to. So we can introduce something like this, which is adding a little bit of... But once you get to this kind of thing, unless you're trying to make it sound a bit bad, look at, 0.5 or less as a general rule. You can run your jitter in mono or in stereo. And if you watch the video on noise, you'll note a section about dichotic noise, which means that normally noise is just central, but dichotic means that you've got different noise left and right. And that's creating a dichotic jitter. In other words, the amount of jitter, or where the head is different on the left and the right. Little disconcerting. It does have a slight stereoifying effect. I'm not sure whether you want to be using that to create more stereo, but it is a valid thing. So mono or stereo. Mono meaning you've got one head and the jitter is shared, or stereo meaning you've got two heads and the jitter is different from head to head. There's then a set of filters. And they really don't belong in a DAC, but it makes reasonable sense that they be here because it is common enough to get a lot of stuff that you don't necessarily want, and to be able to get rid of it is not entirely a bad thing. And seeing you're doing that, well, you might as well play with the other end as well. Then we've got really stuff that's past the DAC stages, getting back into the real world. We've got the ability to just drive. That's just a good old-fashioned drive circuit. Non-linear, analog-y style drive. Tubey, whatever, don't know. He doesn't specify what it is. It's quite nice. I think it's pretty nasty when you hit it hard. I've encountered the same drive unit in his sampler, and there's something else I was playing with. Oh, his drum unit that I reviewed as well. It's this, which when you go hard is nasty. It just But that's the nature of the beast. But in softer settings, it adds a nice little something. So you can have a tiny bit of jitter, a little bit of drive. We've got quite a bit on the front end here. Let's pull that back to 0. Just adding a little bit of so I think it sounds kind of cool. We have lost some level somehow, somewhere. Now we've got more punch and a little bit of movement inside here, which is kind of nice. You can mix between wet and dry. I'm not sure that's a great plan because I think that there may be phase difference between the two, but it's there. So if you're like to sit on the fence kind of a cat, then I guess you can use it. I don't think I will ever use that. Your business, no need to write and tell me that I'm missing out. I know what I'm missing out on, and it's something I don't care about in the first place. If you dig it, go ahead and dig it, do it, make your records with it. No need to tell me I'm missing out. So you can balance up your levels. You can see I'm looking over here, going, okay, let's get them sort of about the same. They'll never be 100% the same because we are doing things that change our perception. So it's an ears thing. Do not spend your time, watch the video on levels, but do not spend your time obsessing about making sure that everything's always the same level. It's just if you're going, well, am I improving this process or simply making it louder, then it's wise to kind of level match them before you simply go, oh, that one's better because it's louder. But the more experience you have, the more you're able to tell if it's better, regardless of a reasonable level difference. You know, we're not talking about -50 to +12 because obviously they're going to sound so radically different you can't compare apples to nuclear bombs. That's really all our knobs and controls. It's about, as I've said, working out how to be subtle with it. I like the sound that I have at the moment, so let's throw it back in the mix, see what we get. Yeah, it's nice. Here how the drums are forward may seem like a good thing, but they kind of don't sit very nicely in the piece anymore. They're just kind of flat and sticky taped on the front. Now they've actually got more punch. A lot of the high end has been relaxed, and so they sit inside the mix really quite nicely. Let's put back the compressor, which is doing very little. Yeah, we'll leave that. That's good enough. Now let's look at the others. This is using TAL Sampler. That's the sound that I showed here, and it's going through this DAC. Now it's a nice sounding sampler. It really is. It's very TAL filtery. Maybe those filters sound more Juno-y than any synth that I ever used. I don't think he's gone out of his way to try to emulate Akai, let alone EMU filters, which were great, although the Emax 1 was a Curtis chip. So to offer us Jupiter 8 type filter is quite consistent with the Emax 1. But nonetheless, it's a pleasing sounding unit. But we bring this in, or when we bring this in, I've deliberately gone with a relatively low sample rate and a bit of crushing. And at least in cans, there's actually quite a lot of noise happening on top there. But that is giving us a nice sense of presence in the mix. while we've messed up our sound in many ways, it sits more comfortably in the mix and there is more movement. Whether it's right, who knows, because this mix has no great purpose. And then, of course, we've got our last sound with this arpeggiator. I chose Subtractor because it's famous for being a tremendous synth. It's just one of the same guys behind the Nord lead, but people go, it's so very digital, man. So, okay, let's put a DAC on it. Yes, it is very clean. Except for where there's a slight aliasing, but who cares about that? That's for children to worry about. Pull off the delay. Now this is really noisy. I've gone pretty nasty here. But, in terms of the mix, the sound goes from quite static to suddenly becoming this really mobile. Also, that noise that's on top of the high end is masking a fair amount of the super clean let's go all the way to the top, or at least all the way until we're band limited. And that means that it becomes softer, more analogy feel, more real world feel than that just perfect extension. Of course, when we add in the Hertz delay, which is this, free of course on our site, then we do get a lot more natural movement here. Let's just pull. Now if we pop this delay before the DAC, not so good. And that's not to say you can't do that. At one stage I did have it before, but it just makes the signal an awful lot more complex, and if we are being a little on the heavy-handed side with our DAC, then chances are it will just get more messed up as the signal becomes more complex, because obviously the delay is adding a lot of complexity. So again, you're probably mostly, if wanting to emulate 80s samplers, 80s instruments, going to want to go instrument, DAC, effects. There is also in the full mix a Hertz multiplier, which is providing our reverb duties. It does make for a slightly washy sound, but that was what I wanted. And that's where having these this gives us that perfect sort of 90s, 2000 kind of digital thing. It's all very clean and lovely. Now, it gives it a much warmer, more separated kind of feel. Those instruments feel like they are a little more separated from each other rather than just being sticky taped to the front of your ears. In this case, I also was running my favourite friend G-Sonic's analog tape because it warms the mix up, it swallows a lot of the nastiness on the front here, and obviously improves this as well. So perfect digital, DAC'd. It works really, really nicely all around. So rather than saying I'm going to get all my sound, all my feel, all my vibe in one place, I'm doing it in several places here. I'm doing it at the DAC on each device, saying, okay, how do I want this to sound? In this case, I've got my my tape device that's adding a real feel of its own, a little bit of groove compression, another Scream running its tape drive. So that just brightens things, because this can get a little murky. Not badly, but I like a bright, clean, clear mix, so this helps just brighten that up. And then another layer of saturation. So all these little bits of saturation are creating that more kind of a chewy, warm, rich mix. And in this case, DAC's Tal DAC is really adding a lot of interest. We could do similar with distortion units, but they're going to have a different feel. Like if I were to put Scream in place of Tal DAC, I would have a different feel. Definitely if I were to use the bit crushing, just the plain resolution and rate, I would not be getting the subtlety. So if you're looking at a bit crusher and going, these aren't very subtle, which is what's put me off them really all the way through the time that they've existed, then do look at Tal's DAC, because it's possible to run it a lot more subtly. And if you really are looking for that feel that we did get out of instruments where the DAC was an important part of the sound of that instrument, and the manufacturers were fully aware of that, particularly, as I say, EMU, with their emulators and Emaxes and then the ESIs and what have you, but they became more technically perfect. They became more a technical thing as time went by, unfortunately, as they tried to compete with Akai and the like, which is part of what killed them. It's a shame that they couldn't reboot now with everyone's obsession with old stuff, because then we could get back to the real EMU thing. But nonetheless, if you're chasing that sort of feel, then this DAC does allow you to have a pretty high amount of fine control, and the more you understand how this works, which would be nice if there were a far better manual, or you simply need to take time twisting the knob and working out how they relate not only to themselves but to things around them. Then you will get to a point where you go, I can use this to do very nice ways of adding a little bit of noisy types of movement into some or all of the signal in my chains. So overall, not for everyone. And while you can do aggressive, brutalizing stuff with it, it really excels far more if you are looking for, like what I would be looking for, a more subtle or beautiful way of just adding that extra little bit of something that is not going to be the same as what you would be adding if you were using a straight drive kind of unit, whether that be a soft saturated drive or a ripping 5150 kind of drive. It's a charm to the device. That's really my final words. Didn't presage it, but we can when I am doing the edit. If you have any questions about the program, please not about Tal per se, because those questions should go to Tal so he can answer them correctly. But any questions about the device in general in terms of how we've presented here, then hit subscribe, ask your question on down below. That's it. Whatever you do, spend your time with this, take your time, make sure you have a great day. And of course there is higherhertz.com, different stream of information there, and you can get your sticky fingers on Hertz delay and multiplier. And I might just say ever so quietly that there is a new device being worked upon in the background. Have a great day.